Hello, hello, Professor I here once again. Welcome to my week 6 video musings. So if you've made it this far, you're doing really well. Congrats, you're almost to the halfway point. And I hope that things are going well for you in your life and that you're staying safe and healthy. And now let's talk about week 6. So you have an interesting reading. It's our very last one in Unit 1, and it is Girl by Jamaica Kincaid. And it's another kind of fascinating look at relationship, this time between a girl and her mom in a very specific cultural context. And you'll get that as you are reading this piece. So be thinking about how many voices you're actually hearing in the piece. And then you have a couple of other little readings, documents that I'm going to go over with you right now if you want to follow along with me. One of them is Attribution and the other is Dropped Quotes, because you want to avoid dropping quotes. That's a very considered an egregious error in college writing. And you don't want to be doing it in paper 1, obviously, which comes due on Monday the 5th, by the way. So that's not too long away. Your main job is work on that revised draft of paper 1. And then you do have one topic in the week 6 discussion board, and that is considering Jamaica Kincaid's Girl. And then I want you to play my Kahoot. I have created this Kahoot, which is all about avoiding dropped quotes. So after you have read through the documents about that and listened to me talk about it in this video, go play the Kahoot and see how much of the knowledge you're actually retaining, because it will help you on submitting this final draft of paper 1. So that's kind of what's happening this week. So if you want to follow along with me with that attribution, incorporating sources with signal words document, again, you would go to Content and then to Course Documents and then click on Attribution. So you know the meaning of the word attribute. So if we attribute an idea to someone or words to someone, we're basically saying that person originated this idea or these words. So in writing, in college writing, attribution refers to the introduction of our sources when they are incorporated into an essay. We're attributing this idea or these words to this source and making that clear to our readers. So attribution is showing your reader that your evidence or your quote, whatever it is coming from a source that's reliable, that is identifiable. And sometimes your attribution, that sentence where you're introducing that source or that quote, might contain the name of the book that you're using, or the title of the article, or whatever it is that you're writing about, and or the author's credentials. And that shows your reader that, you know, hey, I didn't just pull this from thin air. So here's an example of that. Literary critic Clive Austin, the author of Mark Twain Revealed, explains that Twain's greatest strength lay in his humor. So we know that this guy, Clive Austin, is a literary critic. He's not just some guy that we pulled off the street somewhere who doesn't know anything about literature. He's actually a professional literary critic, and we know that he wrote this book called Mark Twain Revealed, and we've paraphrased his words here. We don't have a direct quote from Clive Austin, but the paraphrase is, Twain's greatest strength lay in his humor. And then in parentheses, we have the page number from where we got that idea from Austin. It's 49. Why do we not have to put Austin 49 in the parentheses? Because we already said his name in our attribution. So this is a good way to sort of introduce a source for the first time. Tell your reader who this person is, what his or her credentials are, so that you establish your own ethos, your own sense of credibility and trustworthiness to your reader. Here's the golden rule. Never, ever, ever, ever just drop a quote into your writing without indicating in some way why it's there and without incorporating it into your actual writing. That is very, very important. So here's the golden rule. Whenever a quote appears as a sentence all by itself, and it's just the quote, you've dropped it. And that is an error, and that will cost you points on your grade. So you've got to introduce it with some sort of sentence or phrase of your own. And the easiest way to do that gracefully is with what we call signal phrases or signal words, which serve to link that quote with your sentences and often to name the author of that material. So here's an example of a quote that's been dropped. Holden gets frustrated and decides to leave, period. Quote, people are always ruining things for you, unquote. Salinger, 88. So now, yes, it's been cited in MLA. We've got the author who said the quote. We've got the page number where the quote came from. But see how that quote appears all by itself as a sentence? People are always ruining things for you, quote unquote. You dropped it. You have to incorporate it into a sentence or a phrase of your own. There's no introduction really to the quoted passage much. We just know that Holden gets frustrated, but we don't even know who said these words. Did Holden say those words, or did someone else say the words? You know, we don't really understand the point. So you want to avoid this by introducing the quote, trying to explain who's speaking, what's happening, etc. I always tell, my 10-10 students, I don't care if the quote fell from heaven or rose up from hell. If you dropped it, if you put it all by itself as a sentence, it's dropped and you get points deducted. So don't let that happen to you. Here's an example of that quote integrated. Holden gets frustrated and decides to leave, claiming that, quote, people are always ruining things for you. So now we know that Holden is the person who's speaking, at least, right? And now it's part of the writer's sentence structure. It's not just appearing by itself, that quote. Another way to eliminate the dropped quote would just be to add the signal word she says, the author claims. Holden gets frustrated and decides to leave, period. He claims that people are always ruining things for you. You can use signal words or signal phrases to introduce a quote that supports your view. You can use attribution to establish the credibility of the people you're quoting. And here is a good example of a well-done attribution from a really interesting student paper about body modification. And this was a paper from UT from some years back when I taught there. So body modification appears to be universal among human species, perhaps due to the nature of the human body itself. As Germaine Greer, a doctor of psychology and expert in the field, writes, quote, humans are the only animals which can consciously and deliberately change their appearance according to their own whims, unquote. And then we have the page number 161 in parentheses, which is correct MLA citation, because we've mentioned Greer's name in our attribution. So the reader reads that, the reader knows who Germaine Greer is, that she's an expert in this field of body modification, and we know the page number where this quote came from. So if we were to turn to this writer's works cited page, that very last page at the end of the paper, then we would see Greer, Germaine, and then we'd see the title of that piece, and we get the full information about it so that you and I too could go and find that writing. So you can use these signal words or phrases to extend your argument, and here's an example of that from this same paper. Many more mundane elements of our social life can be thought of as body modification rituals. For instance, as Greer argues, quote, fashion, because it is beyond logic, is deeply revealing, unquote. So that, for instance, as Greer argues, is an attribution. It's a signal phrase. It's letting us know Greer's about to speak again. And her argument is being extended here, right? She's saying something more here. So body modification isn't just getting a tattoo or a piercing, right? Even what you choose to wear, fashion is an example of that. You can use signal words or phrases to challenge somebody else's argument. And here's an example of that from this same paper. While Greer claims that, quote, beautification and mutilation are the same activity, unquote, and there's a beginning parenthesis missing from that 166, my bad. Ooh. One could argue that some body modification should be clearly seen and judged to be harmful and cruel by civilized societies. In effect, that beautification and mutilation must be kept separate. And just FYI, what this student was talking about here is Greer was claiming that in some societies where genital mutilation happens, that is actually acceptable in her mind as a sort of beautification, a modification of the body that is beautiful. But this writer disagreed with Greer on that one point and said, no, that's mutilation. That has to be a separate thing. There are all kinds of signal words you can use in a signal phrase, and I give a few there. And you want to notice how these words like acknowledges, concludes, emphasizes, replies, disagrees, suggests, asserts. All of these words are so much better than says. Greer says that because that doesn't tell us anything about how Greer feels about the subject. So if you're more specific with your choices of signal verbs, then your reader has a more clear understanding of your points. So remember, you can certainly disagree with a reading or an idea, but you can also agree with it. You can spend your response time explaining more about why the reading is making a strong point. You can challenge, problematize, extend your argument, discuss the implications, propose a new idea or solution. And I give you some little templates here on the sheet that you can use. So while Smith argues X, Y is actually the case. Now this one actually comes from the department and it says, in my view, Smith is correct. Get out of the in my view because you don't want to use first person in college writing. No first person, no second person, right? Unless it's part of a quote. So a better example here would be, one may argue that Smith is correct, or just Smith is correct. To propose a new solution or idea, Smith suggests X, while X is partially true, new evidence or another perspective demonstrates Y. And then I give you a template to introduce a quote. So according to blank, and then a comma and the person's credentials and a comma, then the quote, the end quotation mark, and the page number in parentheses. And notice your period is coming after that last parenthesis. That's going to be the case with MLA. So you're just going to plug your information into that template. And here's an example. According to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., comma, civil rights leader and clergyman, comma, the purpose of the direct action program was, quote, to create a situation so crisis-packed that it will inevitably open the door to negotiation, unquote. And then 503, the page number from which that quote was taken, in parentheses, and then the period. So to introduce a paraphrase, you're just going to do the same thing, only when you get to the quote, you're going to put the author's words into your own words. That's what that word paraphrase means. And there are rules about paraphrasing that you hopefully remember from 1010. So you're not going to use the same type of sentence structure. You're going to mix it up so that it's different from the writer's sentence structure. You're not going to use the same wording unless it's a term that is specific maybe to a particular jargon that there just isn't any substitute term for. So here's an example of how to do that. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., author of Letter from a Birmingham Jail, tells us that the direct action program's goal was to bring about a situation so filled with calamity that it would invariably become the catalyst for cooperation. So the only word that remained the same there is situation. And so you might even want to find a different one, experience maybe, rather than situation. But as with all good writing, you want to avoid monotony. Don't repeat the same wording close together. That breaks the flow of your writing. That causes your writing to lose its rhythm. And so you want to vary the signal phrases that you're using. You don't want to use the same one. I had a student last semester who was using the same dadgum signal phrase every single time. And it was a good one. But like anything, when you just use it over and over and over, it loses its oomph, right? So these are just some examples in the words of, as so-and-so noted, so-and-so points out that. And then there is another document that will be helpful to you here, and it's an Attribution Verbs handout. It's directly below that other document. And so it's showing you signal words you can use in different scenarios. So if you have a source that is just kind of neutral, so the person is not like adamant one way or another, you can use a signal verb like comments. So-and-so comments that, so-and-so observes, so-and-so notes that, right? But if the source is maybe arguing strongly, then you can use a signal verb like alleges or contends or holds or insists, right? If the source is just kind of inferring or suggesting but not actually coming right out and being strong about it, you can use a signal verb like speculates or considers, something like that. If the source agrees with someone or something else, admits, agrees, concedes, concurs. If it's uneasy or disagreeing, then you've got signal verbs like disagrees, warns, laments, complains, signal verbs that are stronger. And then the other document that you really need to look at, again, you'll find it in content and course documents, is that document on dropped quotes. And so it's dropped quotes, info, and exercises for students. And it explains to you why it's important to avoid a dropped quote. It disrupts the flow of your writing and of your thought. It creates an abrupt change in voice. And it may leave your reader wondering why in the heck you even put that quote in there. You're not just throwing the quote in there as an artificial device or because your professor said you needed to do it, but you're doing that in order to help establish your points. And so you want to fluently integrate, as we've just been saying, direct quotes. And that way you can strategically introduce your readers to this new speaker. You can connect your point that you're trying to make to their point. You can provide your audience with a very clear sense of how that quote is supporting your idea or your argument or your interpretation, right? And so how do you do it? Well, you use the signal phrases. Noted journalists propose that. Experts from the Center for Disease Control advise citizens to. You can use an informative sentence to introduce the quote. And here are some examples. The results of dietitian Sally Smith's research counter the popular misconception that a vegan diet is nutritionally incomplete, And see, the second example also has the colon. And so after that colon would be a quote from Sally Smith from her research, right? Now, what if that colon in those examples had been turned into a period? Then the quote would be appearing all by itself as a sentence. And remember our rule? That's a dropped quote. So you can use that colon method when your sentence before the quote, your phrase before the quote, is actually a complete sentence. You can turn what would have been a period into a colon and incorporate your quote. So there are some exercises here that I give you on this sheet as well, different passages, and you can think about them and ask yourself, okay, did this passage effectively integrate this quote or not, according to the rules that we have learned? And of course, in the Kahoot that I hope you're going to play, and by the way, I can see who did and who didn't do that, and it won't take you very long, so you want to do it. You'll get a chance to actually put some of these ideas into action and see how proficient you are at doing it. And that will be good for you as we're about to submit that final draft of paper 1. So thanks for your patience. Good luck with your final draft and with all the other things that you have going on. And I will see you soon.